My friend had two, at some point in his life, had two teenage daughters, and I called him once and asked at the end of our little conversation how they were doing. He said they're committing adolescence. There's such a thing called the Fulbright poem, a subspecies of poetry. A Fulbright poem is the poem you write when you get a Fulbright and go to Europe. And the Fulbright poem, it has to take place in Europe, and it has to mention a fountain. That's basically the requirements of the genre. So when you come back from your year abroad, you hand your poem to the Fulbright Committee, and they go to Europe, and then the fountain goes, okay, you're fine. Dispense with your Fulbright duties. So I've never had a Fulbright, so I've never written that poem, but this does take place in Europe, in Sicily actually, and it's really more about the effects of extreme heat, because I was there in August, stupidly enough, on perception, and it's called Palermo. It was foolish of us to leave our room. The empty plaza was shimmering, the clock looked ready to melt. The heat was a mallet striking a ball and sending it bouncing to the nettles of summer. Even the bees had knocked off for the day. The only thing moving besides us, and we had since stopped under an awning, was a squirrel who was darting this way and that, as if he were having second thoughts about crossing the street, his head and tail twitching with indecision. You were looking in a shop window, but I was watching the squirrel, who now rose up on his hind legs, and after pausing to look in all directions, began to sing in a beautiful voice a melancholy aria about life and death. His forepaws clutched against his chest, his face full of longing and hope, as the sun beat down on the roofs and awnings of the city, and the earth continued to turn and hold in position the moon, which would appear later that night as we sat in a cafe, and I stood up on the table with the encouragement of the owner and sang for you and the others the song the squirrel had taught me how to sing. The title of this book I'm reading from is called Horoscopes for the Dead, and that poem came about a few years ago after a long-time friend of mine had died. All the deaths of all friends are premature, and perhaps the death of everyone is premature in a way. But I remember whenever I come across a horoscope, I would usually read mine, and I'd read maybe a loved one, a parent, or whatever, and his sign was always contiguous to mine, so I would read his. So after he had died, I caught myself a couple of times reading his horoscope and was struck at the romantic futility of that exercise. Horoscopes for the Dead. Every morning since you disappeared for good, I read about you in the daily paper, along with the box scores, the weather, and all the bad news. Some days I am reminded that today will not be a wildly romantic time for you, nor will you be challenged by educational goals, nor will you need to be circumspect at the workplace. Another day, I learned that you should not miss an opportunity to travel and to make new friends, though you never cared much about either. I can't imagine you ever facing a new problem with a positive attitude, but you will definitely not be doing that or anything like that on this weekday in March. And the same goes for the fun you might have gotten from group activities, a likelihood attributed to everyone under your sign. A dramatic rise in income would maybe a reason to treat yourself, but that would apply more to all the Pisces who are still alive, still swimming up and down the stream of life. But you will be relieved to learn that you no longer need to reflect carefully before acting, nor will creative work take a back seat to the business responsibilities that you never really had. And don't worry today, or any day, about postponing a weighty decision. No more goals for you, no more romance, no more money or children, jobs or important tasks, but then again, you were never thus encumbered. So leave it up to me now to plan carefully for success and the wealth it may bring, to beware of false friends, and to welcome any intellectual stimulation that comes my way, though that sounds like a lot to get done on a Tuesday. I am better off closing the newspaper, putting on the same clothes I wore yesterday when I read that your financial prospects were looking up, than pushing off on my copper-colored bicycle and pedaling along the shore road by the bay. And you stay just as you are, lying there in your beautiful blue suit, your hands crossed on your chest, like the wings of a bird who has flown in a strange migration, not north or south, but straight up from Earth, and pierced the enormous circle of the zodiac. Well, I'm going to read a couple poems about dogs. We went out for a walk on the beach today with this famous dog called Brother, and then we were having a great time. I was throwing the stick for him, and he was bringing it back, and then he just disappeared. I think he had enough of it, and we were walking around yelling, "Where art thou, brother?" With no response. And we finally walked back to the trailhead and found out that he caught a ride back home with somebody else. So he had just blown us off. It was like, enough of the stick throwing. I'm going home, I guess. But, so we were relieved not to have. Losing the dog of the host is never a good idea. Yeah, we had a great time, but your dog is gone. But seeing you is excellent. Here's a little poem spoken by a dog. It's from the dog's point of view, and the dog is contemplating one of the facts of dog ownership, or it should be called co-ownership. It's called A Dog on His Master. As young as I look, I am growing older faster than he. 7 to 1 is the ratio they tend to say. Whatever the number, I will pass him one day and take the lead, the way I do on our walks in the woods. And if this ever manages to cross his mind, it would be the sweetest shadow I have ever cast on snow or grass. That sound you made is the reason I wrote this next poem. I love writing about dogs, but you can dip into sentimentality, or you have to fight, struggle against it, usually unsuccessfully in every line. So at one point I thought I would try to write a poem in which people didn't make that sound, but maybe feel free to make another sound. But this also is a poem written by a dog, or from the point of view of a dog. It's called The Revenant, a ghost. Right? The Revenant. I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call the needle of oblivion. Come back to tell you this simple thing. I never liked you. When I licked your face, I thought of biting off your nose. When I watched you toweling yourself dry, I wanted to leap and unman you with a snap. I resented the way you moved, your lack of animal grace, the way you would sit in a chair to eat, a napkin on your lap, a knife in your hand. I would have run away, but I was too weak. A trick you taught me while I was learning to sit and heel, and greatest of insults, shake hands without a hand. I admit the sight of the leash would excite me, but only because it meant I was about to smell things you had never touched. You do not want to believe this, but I have no reason to lie. I hated the car, hated the rubber toys, disliked your friends, or worse, your relatives. The jingling of my tags drove me mad. You always scratched me in the wrong place. All I ever wanted from you was food and fresh water in my metal bowls. While you slept, I watched you breathe as the moon rose in the sky. It took all of my strength not to raise my head and howl. Now I am free of the collar, free of the yellow raincoat, monogrammed sweater, the absurdity of your lawn. And that is all you need to know about this place, except what you already supposed and are glad it did not happen sooner, that everyone here can read and write, the dogs in poetry, the cats and all the others in prose.